The sound of the jeep's engine broke the deep silence of the forest. David looked up the dusty road at the massive structure towering above even the treetops. Tower 4, a completely glass-enclosed observation cell, standing on steel legs 30 meters above the ground. This was his new home. The jeep stopped. The man at the wheel, Frank, turned off the engine but left the key in. Frank was in his 50s. His face was sunburned, but his complexion was pale. His eyes constantly scanned the forest. It was as if he wanted to leave as soon as possible. "Is this all your stuff?" Frank asked, looking at David's backpack. "Yes," said David. "I travel light." Frank nodded. "Good, let's go upstairs. I need to show you the system. I have to leave here before sunset." David looked at the sky. Sunset was still 2 hours away. He wanted to ask, "What's the rush?" but didn't. Frank's tension was contagious. Together, they began climbing the long, spiral metal staircase. Clang, clang, clang. Their boots made a metallic sound on each step. The wind grew stronger as they climbed higher. The tower swayed slightly. When they reached the top, they stepped onto the narrow walkway surrounding the cell. Frank immediately pulled a key from his pocket, opened the heavy steel door, and pushed David inside. He quickly entered himself and closed the door. "This is it," said Frank. 360-degree view. Radios on the desk. The bed's over there. The kitchen gas cylinder is full. David dropped his bag on the floor. He was mesmerized by the view. An endless sea of forest. "Amazing," said David. "Exactly the silence I was looking for." Frank put his hand on David's shoulder. His hands were shaking. "Listen, son," he said. His voice was very serious. "Silence is beautiful, but here, silence is never empty. There are things I need to tell you before you go. These things aren't in the park management handbook. These are rules for survival." David smiled. "Are you trying to scare me, Frank? Are you talking about bears?" Frank got angry. "Shut up and listen," he yelled. David was surprised. Frank took a deep breath and began to explain. "First," said Frank, pointing to the square metal cover trapdoor on the ground. "The cover we're standing on right now. As soon as you go inside, you'll lock this. But that's not enough. See that heavy toolbox? You'll put it on top of the cover every night. Locks can be broken, David, but the weight slows them down." "Who are they?" asked David. Frank ignored the question. He pointed outside with his finger at those long stairs. "Second, the stairs. There are exactly 160 steps up this tower. I counted them countless times. The wind blows at night. The metal expands. It makes noise. That's normal. But if you hear a rhythmic footstep like someone is climbing, don't look outside. Just start counting." David frowned. "Why am I counting?" "Because," said Frank, fixing his eyes on David, If the sound stops at the 160th step, it's fine. Maybe it's a forester. But if the footsteps continue, if you hear 161, 162, know that whatever is coming has finished the stairs and is now walking on air or climbing the window. At that moment, the only thing you can do is turn off the lights and get under the bed. Don't look at the window. David couldn't say anything. Frank was very serious. He looked like he was going crazy, but the fear in his eyes was very real. "Third," said Frank, walking over to the radio on the table. "The radio will stay on channel 1. You'll talk to headquarters from here. But sometimes, especially around 3:00 a.m., the radio will change channels on its own. It will switch to channel 9. You'll hear static and voices on that channel. Familiar voices. Your mom, your dad, an old friend." David swallowed. He thought of Lily, the daughter he had lost 3 years ago. Familiar voices. "Yes," said Frank. "They'll try to trick you. They'll say, 'Help me, I'm down here, I've fallen.' Don't answer, David. Don't pick up the radio. Just turn down the volume and wait. If you answer, you'll be telling them where you are." Frank looked at his watch. The sun was about to set behind the mountains. "I have to go," he said, panicking. He ran to the door. "I can't stay in the dark. They don't like light, but they hunt in the dark." Frank opened the door and went out. He ran down the stairs. The metallic sounds faded, and stopped. Down below, the Jeep's engine started. The Jeep sped away. David was left alone in the tower. The sun set, and Blackwood Forest was plunged into darkness. 11:45 p.m. The first few hours passed quietly. David tried to dismiss Frank's words as nonsense. "The old man's lost his mind," he said to himself. "Loneliness drives a man mad." Still, a feeling inside him urged him on. He locked the hatch on the floor, and, as Frank had said, he dragged the 50-pound toolbox over and placed it on top of the hatch. "Just a precaution," he said. He made himself a cup of coffee. He began reading his book by the light of the gas lamp. Outside, the wind howled. The tower creaked and swayed slightly. It was strange to be at this height. He felt like a fish in an aquarium. The darkness outside was watching him, but he couldn't see it. 00:20. David paused as he turned the page of his book. He had heard a sound. From below, clunk, a metallic, hollow sound. A boot hitting the iron step. David held his breath. "It's the wind," he said. Clunk, a second sound, clearer. Someone was climbing the stairs. Heavy, sure steps. Clunk, clunk, clunk. David's heart raced. Frank's words echoed in his mind. "Start counting." Reluctantly, David began counting in his head. 30, 31. The sounds were regular. No pauses, no gasping for breath. The 50th step. David stood up. He took the flashlight, but didn't turn it on. He approached the window. He wanted to look down, He wanted to see who had come. Maybe Frank had forgotten something and come back. But why hadn't Frank radioed him? And why hadn't he heard the Jeep? The 100th step. The footsteps were getting closer. The tower shook a little more with each step. Whatever was coming was heavy. David looked at the hatch on the floor. The toolbox was on top of it. The lock was closed. "It can't get in," David said. "It's impossible." 150. The sound was very close now, right below him. David pulled back into the middle of the room. 158. 159. 160. The footsteps stopped, right on the landing in front of the door. On the iron platform, David waited. Would they knock on the door? Would they shout, "Hey, are you there?" The silence lasted 10 seconds. Only the wind howled. And then, clang, 161. David's blood ran cold. The stairs ended. The platform ended. Step 161 had to be taken into the void. But the sound didn't come from the void. The sound came from the outside of the tower. Scratch. It wasn't a metallic sound. It was the sound of a wet palm sticking to glass, like a suction cup. Squeak, squeak. Something was climbing up the outside of the glass, defying gravity, climbing like a spider. David immediately extinguished the gas lamp. He plunged the room into darkness. He collapsed to the floor. He crawled under the bed. What had Frank said? "Don't look at the glass." What had Frank said? "Don't look at the glass." The sound began circling the tower. David could see its shadow in the moonlight. A long, shapeless shadow glided across the glass. The tower's 360-degree glass walls were now a curse for David. There was nowhere to hide. Everywhere was exposed. The sound stopped on David's side of the bed, right on the glass above his head. There was only a thin layer of glass between them. David stopped breathing. He covered his mouth with his hand. Tap, tap, tap. It tapped on the glass with its fingernail, very slowly, like a customer checking the quality of their food inside. A whisper came from outside, from the other side of the glass. It spoke in David's own voice. "Frank opened the door. I dropped the key." David closed his eyes tightly. "This isn't me," he thought. "This is an imitation." The thing outside knocked again. Tap, tap, tap. "Come on, David. I was just joking. Open the door." David didn't move. The presence outside grew angry. Scream. It scraped its nails against the glass. A disgusting, ear-piercing sound. The tower shook. Then the sound continued upward. It climbed onto the roof. Heavy footsteps echoed on the metal roof. Thud, thud, thud. It stopped right above David's head and began to wait there. David had been lying under the bed on the dusty floor for 2 hours. His body was stiff as a board. The sound on the roof had stopped, but there was no sign that it had left. There was no sound of it coming down. It was still up there. Or perhaps it was waiting, clinging to the windows. It was still up there. Or perhaps it was waiting, pressed against the windows. The only thing breaking the silence in the room was the faint crackle of the radio. It was on Channel 1. David wanted to reach for the radio to feel a little better. He could notify headquarters. He could say, someone is climbing the tower. He crawled out from under the bed. He crawled on his knees toward the table. He reached the radio. He was about to pick up the microphone. Just then, the small green light on the radio flashed. The one on the digital display disappeared. The numbers spun rapidly and stopped 9. Channel 9. The faint static from the radio suddenly changed. A deep, undulating noise came through, like sounds from underwater. David pulled his hand back. He remembered Frank's warning. Don't turn it off. Just turn down the volume. David reached for the volume knob, but the sound coming from the radio stopped him. A small, thin girl's voice. Daddy. David froze. It was Lily's voice. Her voice from 3 years ago. Not that cheerful, sweet voice. The voice from right after the accident. That frightened, suffering voice. Daddy, it's so dark here. Where are you? David's eyes filled with tears. His mind said, this is a trap. But his heart, a father's heart, couldn't bear it. Lily, David whispered involuntarily. The voice on the radio answered. Daddy, I'm among the trees. I can see the tower. Why is the light off, Daddy? Can't you see me? David stood up. He wanted to run to the window. He wanted to look down to see his daughter. It was impossible. Lily was dead. He had buried her with his own hands. But what if she wasn't dead? What if the forest had somehow brought her back? The human mind clings to the most absurd hopes in its greatest pain. Dad, there's someone behind me, a tall person. They're coming towards me. Open the door, Dad, please. Open the door. The voice turned into a scream. Dad, help me. David grabbed his flashlight. He ran to the window. He forgot all of Frank's rules. He opened the curtain. He shone the flashlight down into the darkness of the forest. Lily, he shouted, are you there? The beam of light scanned the ground. Trees, bushes, rocks. No one was there. The voice on the radio suddenly stopped. The scream stopped. David was panting, looking out the window. Where are you? He said. A hoarse, deep voice came from the radio. That thing's voice. I'm not down there, David. Look up. David raised his head. The flashlight's beam hit the top part of the window. There was a face pressed against the glass. It was upside down. It was hanging down from the roof. Its face was deathly pale. It had no eyes, only deep sockets. Its mouth, however, its mouth was stretched wide open, wider than a normal human could open. And from that mouth came Lily's voice. See? David screamed and fell backward. The window shook. The creature slammed its head against the glass. Crack. A thin crack appeared in the glass. The creature was smiling. It didn't need a door to get inside. It would break the glass. As David stared at the cracking glass, time seemed to slow down. The smile of that thing, that pale-faced impostor, widened. The creature pulled its head back and slammed it against the glass like a sledgehammer. Crash! The tower's glass shattered into thousands of pieces and exploded inward. The night wind rushed in. Along with the wind, that thing entered too. The creature's body was flexible and boneless, like a snake. It flowed through the broken glass. When it hit the ground, it stood up on 4 legs. It was human-sized, but its arms were very long, reaching past its knees. Its bare skin was gray and wet, and Lily's voice still came from its mouth. "Daddy, I hurt. Why won't you hold me?" Tears streamed from David's eyes, but his anger overcame his fear. "You're not my daughter," he shouted. He lunged for the table, toward the emergency kit. Frank had shown him where it was. The creature pounced on him. David dodged at the last moment. The creature knocked over the table. The radio fell to the floor and shattered. David grabbed the kit. He unzipped it. Inside was an orange pistol, a flare gun. The creature recovered again. It turned to David. The smile was gone from its face. Now there was only hunger. Lily's voice was gone, replaced by that deep growl. "Then I'll wear your skin, David. Maybe then you'll hug me." David raised the pistol. He aimed the barrel at the creature's chest. "You said you don't like light," David said, remembering Frank's words. He pulled the trigger. Boom! A blinding, red phosphorus light shot out of the barrel of the pistol. The flare lodged in the creature's chest and began to burn there. The room turned into a crimson hell. The creature let out a scream so high-pitched it was inaudible to human ears. This sound shook not the windows, but David's mind. The creature staggered backward. It clawed at its burning chest, but the fire had stuck to its skin. The smell of burnt flesh filled the room. It threw itself out the broken window into the void. David ran to the broken window. He looked down. The creature was falling 30 meters below, like a red ball of fire. It hit the ground, but it didn't go out. Still burning, it fled into the forest, into the thickets. Escape, escape. David couldn't stay there. The tower was no longer safe. The windows were broken, and that thing could come back. Or others could come. He pushed the toolbox over the floor hatch. He opened the hatch. He looked at the stairs. They descended like a dark well. 160 steps. David began to descend. Quickly but carefully. He counted with each step. 10, 20, 30. The wind buffeted him. He clung to the iron railings. 60, 70. From below, howls began to rise from the depths of the forest. They weren't wolf howls. They sounded like human screams. The signal flare had awakened them. David sped up. 100, 120. The stairs were almost over. Finally, his boots touched the ground. The 160th step. He was now on the forest floor. His safe tower was gone. He only had the flashlight in his hand and the pocket knife in his pocket. The nearest road was 5 kilometers north. David ran through the forest between the trees. Branches whipped his face, roots caught his feet, but he didn't stop. He could hear the sounds behind him, the rustling of bushes, heavy footsteps. They were following him. He ran for about 10 minutes. His lungs were burning. When he reached a clearing, he stopped to catch his breath. And at that moment, he heard another sound that drowned out the wind. A whistling sound, calm, melodic, an old tune. It was like a cheerful song. It was as if someone was whistling while out for a stroll in the park. David froze. Frank's 4th rule came to mind. If you see someone walking with a flashlight at the northern edge of the forest, don't report it. He's not a hiker. Up ahead, a yellow beam of light appeared through the trees. A figure carrying an old-fashioned gas lamp was approaching. David hid behind a tree. He held his breath. The figure drew closer. He wore an old, worn, green forest ranger uniform. It looked like it was from the 1950s. His hat shaded his face. But when David looked closely, he realized with horror there was no face under the hat, just a smooth, wooden-like surface. No eyes, mouth, or nose. But the whistling sound continued. It was coming from somewhere with no face. The figure passed by the tree where David was hiding. It was impossible for it not to see David. But it didn't stop. It didn't even turn its head. The figure was walking toward the direction David had come from, toward the tower, toward the things that were following David. A few seconds later, agonizing screams came from behind. Then a sharp sound like the crack of a whip. Whack. And silence. The whistling man was the guardian of the forest. And tonight, he had not given permission to hunt. David took advantage of this and continued running in the opposite direction. The herd, David sensed he was approaching the edge of the forest. He could smell the road, the smell of asphalt. A wide meadow appeared before him. Moonlight illuminated the meadow, and in the middle of the meadow was a herd. Deer, about 20 deer, were grazing. David relaxed. Deer were not dangerous. They were natural animals. He could slowly pass by them and reach the road. He stepped onto the meadow. He stepped on a twig. Snap. With the sound, all the deer stopped at once. They stopped grazing. They raised their heads and looked at David. All their eyes were glowing, but not yellow. They were glowing red. Then Frank's final and most terrifying rule came true. If all the deer stand up on their hind legs and look at you, pray. The deer in front slowly rose onto its hind legs. Another followed, then another. Within seconds, all 20 deer were standing upright on their hind legs, like humans. Their front legs hung down at their sides. Their necks were bent at an odd angle. They were looking at David. None of them moved. They just watched. These animals weren't deer. They were something else wearing deer skins. David could see the zipper-like slits in their hides, the misplaced joints. The largest deer in the middle opened its mouth. It didn't make a deer sound. It spoke in a human voice. It spoke in a human voice. David's voice. "Goodbye, David." David screamed and sprinted toward the road with his last ounce of strength. They didn't chase him. They just stood where they were and watched him. When David threw himself onto the asphalt road, he fell to his knees. He started vomiting. Headlights appeared in the distance. A truck was approaching. David got up, waved his hands. "Stop, help." The truck screeched to a halt. The driver got out. He was a big, bearded man. He had a crowbar in his hand. "What the hell is going on?" he yelled. Then he saw David's condition. He was covered in blood, broken glass, and mud. "My God, buddy, are you okay? Did you have an accident?" David grabbed the man's collar. "Drive," he said. "Just drive. Don't look at the forest." The driver saw the madness in David's eyes. He didn't ask any questions. He put him in the cab and stepped on the gas. As the truck pulled away, David looked back in the side mirror. At the edge of the forest, where the trees ended, those 20 deer were still standing on their hind legs, watching the departing truck, and the one in front, raising its hoof, which looked like a human hand, was waving. 2 weeks later, David had returned to the city. He had rented a small apartment. He never turned off the lights. He had covered the windows with black tape. He didn't use a radio. He even kept his phone turned off most of the time. That night, sitting on his bed, he heard the siren of an ambulance passing by on the street. Then the sound stopped. The apartment building fell silent. David went to the kitchen to get a drink of water. His eye caught the small radio on top of the refrigerator. The radio was off. The plug had been pulled, but a faint crackling began to come from the radio's speaker. "SHHHHH." David froze. The crackling became clearer. It turned into a melody, a whistling sound, the whistle that man in the forest had whistled. And then digital red letters appeared on the radio's closed screen. CH9. From the window behind him, a tapping sound came from between the black bars. Tap, tap, tap. David's apartment was on the 5th floor. There was no balcony, but the sound of nails tapping on the glass was very clear. From outside, a familiar voice whispered from the other side of the glass. Frank's voice. 160 steps done, David. Now it's time for the apartment stairs. Have you started counting? David picked up the kitchen knife and looked at the door. From the hallway, metallic footsteps began to echo through the apartment. Clunk, clunk. First step. David began to laugh. He let out a hysterical laugh, because he knew he could leave Blackwood Forest, but Blackwood Forest would never leave his mind.